Welcome back to the Visionary Chronicles, the podcast that explores what sets true visionaries apart from everyday leaders. And we've got a really cool episode today. It comes from my new book I released, The Visionary Leader, The Success Principles of the World's Greatest Visionaries, now available and has already become a bestseller. And I wanted to do a shout out to those that purchased the ebook, the hard copy, and as of last month, the audiobook. And I always say it's not so much the purchase, although that's nice, it's the feedback that I get from those leaders that have applied the principles that I've outlined in the book. That to me is the most rewarding of writing the books. And this is my second book. The first bestseller I had was The Visionary Brand. So this is an extension of that, The Visionary Leader. And the book really extracts what I call essential principles that transform ordinary leaders into extraordinary visionaries. And today's episode draws directly from those powerful insights that I put in the book. Today we're going to talk about Socrates. And this is from the chapter, The Insight. And the visionary, and I outline in the book, in each one of the chapters, legendary visionaries that go back centuries. And I felt it was important for me to talk about visionaries that not a lot of people talk about. Many times what you see in books is people talking about current visionaries. Not that they're not important, but I feel who's even more important are these visionaries that gave us principles that we still utilize today as leaders that are critical, integral to where we are as a society and as leaders in the business world today. So today, welcome back to the Visionary Chronicles. We're going to do something a little bit different today, but it's in the book, The Visionary Leaders. We're going to go back 2,500 years to explore a leader who, interestingly enough, never built a company, never scaled a global brand, and never held an executive title. Why am I talking about him? It's because his methods and principles are more relevant to modern leadership than ever before. Today we're talking about the great philosopher Socrates. Now I know you might be thinking, what does an ancient Greek philosopher have to do with building generational companies in today's marketplace? I can tell you, it's everything, absolutely everything in what you're doing as a leader, both emotionally and technically, and also procedurally, and how you interact with your teams, how you get the most out of your teams, how you allow people to be successful and for you to be humble. So this episode, again, is drawn from my new book, The Visionary Leader, which explores not just modern leaders, but the timeless principles that separates visionaries from managers across all of human history. That's what's unique about the book. And if today's discussion, today's podcast really resonates with you, I'd really encourage you to pick up a copy. It's available now at all major retailers. And Socrates once said, this is a great quote that you probably have heard before, is beware the bareness of a busy life. Socrates had the ability to kind of have an introspective. When he asked questions, they were cutting questions that you really had to think about. In the world where we confuse many times activity with progress, where we're drowning in data but starving for true, authentic wisdom, this warning couldn't be more urgent for you. So let's dive into a philosopher from the 5th century Athens and how he can teach us to lead with greater insight, humility, and impact. So I picked 4 insights that I felt were the most important from Socrates that you can apply to your leadership, and each will multiply your effectiveness as a leader, both personally and with your teams. So insight number 1 was the method. They call it the method. And it's the Socratic Method. Socrates lived in Athens during the 5th century BCE. And while he never wrote down his teachings, which is interesting, his ideas and dialogues were recorded by his students, primarily Plato. I'm sure you've heard of Plato. So Plato was actually his student, one of the other great philosophers of our world, allowing his insight to live on for centuries for us to apply to our day-to-day as leaders. What made Socrates revolutionary wasn't what he knew. It was how he helped others discover what they didn't know they knew. So I call this the Socratic Method. It's a leadership framework for everybody. It's really important that you make note of these things I'm talking about here on this method. Because if you haven't applied it on your day-to-day as a leader, it's something you need to start doing. Not if, but when. So Socrates is best known for this Socratic method, a cooperative, argumentative dialogue that stimulates critical thinking and really illuminates, I call, ideas. This isn't just an academic exercise, it's a leadership tool that you can deploy in your organization today with your team in particular, with idea generation in particular, flushing ideas. It crosses all boundaries from marketing to design to product to human resources to interacting with your team to building leadership with your team. And here's how it works. It's the questioning approach. What you need to do instead of providing direct answers. Socrates engaged in conversation with others to help them explore and refine their ideas. Through carefully crafted questions, he sought to uncover the underlying assumptions, contradictions, or gaps in their reasoning. Think about that. Very few organizations, I should say a lot of people deploy this, but very few do it consistently. And they should. When you're in a room with others in your team, have enough humility to just listen. Not contradict, but listen. Understand and try to draw out of your team the reasoning behind these ideas that they may have. Don't criticize. You need to understand and give the freedom to your team to present ideas with humility and ensure that they have the freedom to do this. So when we talk about it, it's this, again, questioning approach. Think about your last leadership meeting. I love asking these questions, and you should be asking yourself this as well. So whether you're listening in your car, listening at work, reading this, whatever it may be, how much time did you spend telling versus asking? Ask yourself that question honestly. Think about your last leadership meeting. How much time did you spend telling versus asking? How often, second question is, how often did you impose your solution versus helping your team discover the right path themselves? Now, I'm guilty of this back in my early days as well. Is that I wanted to have my ideas accepted. But now you're in a leadership position with a team, and you rely on your team for great ideas, and you don't want that squashed by imposing your solutions versus listening and helping your team discover the right paths themselves. The Socratic method is about stimulating self-discovery with yourself and with your team. You can even ask yourself these questions, which is extremely effective. When you ask the right questions, you don't just get better answers. You build better thinkers. So as you continue with the Socratic method, your team and yourself become better thinkers, Bad ideas are flushed out quicker before they even come to the table. They have the freedom to understand the parameters for bringing ideas to the table. You create a team that doesn't wait for you to solve every problem. You cultivate ownership, create critical thinking, and intellectual independence. Wouldn't that be great to have with your team? Very few brands or teams have this. And there's another method or technique that Socrates had, was called the Elenchus technique. Socrates used a method called Elenchus, a form of cross-examination aimed at exposing contradictions and inconsistency in his team's or speaker's beliefs. This persistent questioning led them to reconsider and refine their views. So think of, again, kind of drafting off those questions I asked. If you were continually constructively asking questions that got you to an end goal, it's uncomfortable work, I get it. But it requires you to challenge assumptions, including your own. But this is where breakthrough thinking happens. This is where disruption happens. This is where visionary leaders want to go down this path. This is where innovation lives. In my years, again, with Oakley, TaylorMade, Nike, I saw this play out repeatedly with visionary leaders. And with Liquid Mind, when we have our whiteboard sessions with leaders and we talk about the Socratic Method, the Elenchus technique. The best product innovations didn't come from executives dictating solutions. They came from rigorous questioning that exposed flawed assumptions and opened new possibilities in conjunction with your team. Think of the eye-opening experience you would have with your leadership team if questions were asked and things weren't rammed down your throat every time you sat in a meeting. Think of the freedom your team would have without being exposed to criticism. So, both the Socratic and Elenchus techniques, let me give you some practical application for your leadership. I'm going to give you 3. What I want you to do is replace asserting statements with probing questions. So instead of a question like, here's what we need to do, try, what problem are we actually solving? Number 2 is expose contradictions constructively. Don't criticize. When strategies conflict with stated values of your company, your brand, your process, or goals, surface this tension through questions, not accusations. Think of how cool that would be to be in a meeting with your leaders. And I've sat in many, many leadership session meetings with brands and companies. And this is the number one issue that I see, is the leaders take over the room. They suck the oxygen out of the room, I call it, and everybody dies around them. So you want to encourage constructive questioning. And number 3 is encourage team members to really articulate their reasoning behind their ideas with questions like this. Walk me through your thinking is way more powerful than the normal question is, here's what I think. It's team versus you. And the team will win every single time. The greatest visionary of our time is Steve Jobs. And Steve used both these methods on a daily basis with his teams to encourage them to articulate their reasoning, to ask constructive questions. It's the Elenchus technique with the Socratic Method. The Socratic Method has had a lasting impact on business, education, the development of really this intellectual inquiry. How do we get intellectual property? How do we get intellectual ideas? It really kind of became this cornerstone of philosophical society at the time. But the cool thing is it continues to be used in the modern business world when leaders are wise enough to adopt it in their day-to-day. Insight number two from Socrates is humility as a competitive advantage. Here's where Socrates gets really interesting for modern leaders. Is humility was a cornerstone of his philosophy. Despite being considered one of the wisest men in Athens by the Oracle of Delphi. I know this goes back a few years. But even to this day, think about it. People, the analogy is whether it be Aristotle, Socrates, Plato, whoever it happens to be, we still use those as an acronym of wisdom. So you get the context of how far this is back and who Socrates truly is and what you use with Socrates on your day-to-day in business. Socrates often claimed ignorance. He didn't say, I'm the wisest guy in the room, as most leaders do today. He claimed ignorance and professed that he knew nothing, rather than speaking from a position of absolute knowledge and authority. He acknowledged his ignorance and sought to engage others in discovery of ideas. This is really a radical transformation of their thinking for leaders. They want to ram ideas down people's throat. They don't want to have to deal with question after question to come to a solution when they feel like they know what the solution is. They delegate the steps to executing their or his or her solution, and teams feel left out, and it creates no loyalty, it creates no authentication, and it creates no trust. This runs counter to almost everything we're taught about leadership. We're told to project confidence, to have all the answers, to never show weakness. But Socrates understood something most leaders miss. Every leader misses this. Intellectual humility is not weakness, it's a strategic advantage. Why does humility matter in leadership? I'll give you 3 points here. One is it opens a dialogue with your team. When you acknowledge what you don't know, others feel safe contributing to what they do know. This really non-dogmatic approach to leadership allows for open dialogue and exploration of diverse perspectives from other people other than yourself. And number 2, it builds trust. Everybody wants trust. Humility is the number 1 word you need to have in your vocabulary and your actions on a daily basis as a leader to build trust with your team is humility. Teams don't trust leaders who pretend to know everything. We've all been there. They trust leaders who are honest about their limitation, their weaknesses, and genuinely curious about finding the best answers to the questions. But you have to ask the questions first. Number 3 is it accelerates learning. Socrates believed in empowering individuals through learning and self-examination. How cool is that? Think of how great your company brand leader would be if they believed in empowering individuals through learning and self-examination. His emphasis on pursuing knowledge and understanding oneself was a transformative approach to individual development. So here's the Socratic irony in modern leadership, having known everything I've just talked about. Socrates employed a form of irony known as the Socratic irony. The Socratic irony, in which he pretended ignorance to encourage others to articulate their ideas. This technique really not only facilitated deeper discussions with people and their teams, but also showcased Socrates' humility and dedication to fostering this growth within others. And think of this as your team. Now, I'll say, if you're smart, but be humble. I'm not suggesting you fake ignorance, but I'm suggesting you create space for others to shine. Be humble. That was one of the greatest weapons that I had, is that I had a lot of self-assurance, self-awareness, and the ability to be humble enough to give credit to others. People know you've contributed as a leader to the success of an idea, but be humble enough to take a backseat to your team and aware enough that you need to give them credit in order to build credibility, trust, and authentication with your team. When you step back and ask questions, you accomplish two things. You get better information, and you develop stronger leaders around you. Isn't that what we all want as leaders? Think about the best leader you ever worked for. Just think about that for a second. Chances are they didn't have all the answers. They're not the smartest person in the room, but they asked the right questions. They made you think, they made you better. That's Socratic leadership. That's why I say it's so important to understand how Socrates impacted your day-to-day, and you don't even know it. And as a leader, if you're not applying these principles, you need to. Not yesterday, but today do it. Number 3 insight is the courage to challenge. Socrates was primarily concerned with ethical questions and the nature of people's virtues. What are your principles? His philosophical questions really centered around examining a person's character, the pursuit of knowledge, and the development of virtues, he called them, such as courage, justice, wisdom, all these things. And people don't use these. The interesting thing is, people and leaders don't necessarily use these terms anymore, such as courage, justice, wisdom. Sometimes they think of courage as risk-taking. Yes, it is. You need to have courage in order to take risks. But what have I always talked about on disruptive brands and companies? Not one company I've ever profiled or ever been with, and I've been to some great brands, some great visionaries, and none of them, 100% have ever had success without the courage to take risks. But here's what made him truly visionary, Socrates. He was willing to challenge the status quo even when it cost him everything. So we talk about intellectual courage in action. This was Socrates. Socrates demonstrated courage by challenging a society's dominant beliefs and assumptions. And this societal beliefs cross over into our business world. He fearlessly questioned the views of prominent figures in Athenian society, inspiring a spirit of inquiry and skepticism. And I say this from a societal perspective, but what you need to understand from a business perspective is how the value I'm giving to you here is the understanding of how to apply this to your day-to-day as a leader is critical and integral to your success. And you need to understand how to apply it. He challenged traditional beliefs and values, including the authority of the gods and the state. You know, we in today's society may think of political beliefs, societal beliefs. He challenged the authority of the gods and the state. It's the same thing. He questioned societal norms and encouraged his students, in your case, your team members, to think critically about what he called the established order at the time. Your job as a leader is to question the status quo of your industry, product, process, or whatever it may be. This commitment to your truth ultimately led to his trial and execution in 399 BCE. Think about that. Are you willing? I'm not saying you're sacrificial. Let that sink in. Socrates was willing to die for his commitment to questioning, to truth seeking, to intellectual freedom. Now, let's lighten it up here a little bit. I'm not asking you to be a martyr, but I am asking you to examine where you stopped questioning. Where have you accepted the way things are done, the status quo? Where have you stopped questioning? When have you even started questioning without a challenge? What are you protecting? Comfort. Where are you protecting comfort? And instead of pursuing the truth, Socrates championed freedom. His commitment to autonomy and the quest of knowledge really laid the groundwork for the principles that we have today. He believed that the pursuit of truth was more important than approval, political power, or even personal safety. Now, the takeaway here for you as a leader is, what are you questioning what you're not questioning that you should be questioning? In business, it translates to something critical: the willingness to challenge industry assumptions before your competitors do. Every major disruption in business history really came from someone who refused to accept conventional wisdom as we know it at the time. Someone who asked the questions everyone else was afraid to ask. Someone who had the intellectual courage to pursue truth over popularity. At the time, it wasn't the right thing to do, the right thing to say. No, let's just stay with the status quo. We're comfortable with our current revenue growth. But you're then not looking out for the future of your brand, company, or process. And how this applies to your organization, let me give you 3 points. One is create safety for dissent. Make it safe for people to challenge ideas, including yours. Number 2 is reward critical thinking over compliance. The status quo. Celebrate the person who spots the flaw in your strategy, not just the one who executes it or agrees with you all the time. That's not what you want. Number 3 is model vulnerability. Be humble. Share your own questions and uncertainties. Show your team that your inquiry is valued over your illusion of certainty. Socrates famously stated that an unexamined life is not worth living. It's pretty deep, but it goes towards what I'm talking about today. So I'd extend that by saying an unexamined strategy is not worth executing. An unexamined product is not worth launching. An unexamined organization is not worth leading. And insight number 4 from Socrates: legacy through influence. Here's something fascinating about Socrates, and I thought was really cool. He's not typically characterized as a visionary leader in what I would call the conventional sense, as he didn't personally bring about significant social or political change. He didn't even build an empire. He didn't accumulate a lot of wealth. He didn't scale an organization. But his influence on philosophy, education, critical thinking in business, in the application of that critical thinking, positions him as a visionary leader in the history of intellectual thought. And we all think, right? And we need to think a certain way. And The power of ideas over infrastructure is another point. Socrates didn't just impart knowledge. He demonstrated a commitment to living an examined life. He was willing to challenge himself as well as others. His pursuit of wisdom and virtue served as an example for others. His life and teachings inspired generations of philosophers, including a student, Plato, who shaped the course of Western thought and culture after Socrates had taught him how to do it. His ideas and methods influence other philosophers, particularly students, Xenophon, Plato. The Socratic Method became a cornerstone of philosophy and continues to be used in modern business and education on a daily basis. His commitment to challenging assumptions, promoting self-examination, pursuing knowledge, has impacted how we approach learning and exploring ideas. Think about that return on investment from Socrates. 2,500 years later, we're still talking about his methods. We're still using his frameworks. We're still learning from his example. So, from all of this from Socrates, and hopefully you've seen the impact of this great visionary leaders I profile in the book, The Visionary Leader. Socrates' approach to philosophy inspired the founding of philosophical business schools and what we call today is the Stoicism and skepticism, whose members valued self-examination and the pursuit of wisdom. His influence extended to various philosophical traditions and schools of thoughts that we still read today. This is a legacy, not quarterly earnings, not market share, not even innovation itself. It's the systems of thinking you create. It's the leaders you develop. It's the culture you build that outlives you. And Socrates understood all of this. And here are some visionary characteristics from Socrates that are worth cultivating in your culture and in your business as a leader. Socrates' legacy continues to shape how philosophy is practiced and studied today. His emphasis on questioning moral inquiries on your daily life and humility remains fundamental to studying ethics and philosophy today. In business leadership, his insightful understanding of in response to the society in which he lived can inspire visionary leaders today. Here's some specific characteristics any would-be visionary leader would do well to start to cultivate today in their daily leadership of their teams, both personally and professionally at their family. Number one is humility, the willingness to acknowledge what you don't know. Number two is the desire for knowledge and constructive debate, prioritizing truth over being right. The commitment to ethical principles, leading with values, not just metrics. Next is willingness to challenge the status quo, questioning assumptions that limit your growth as a company. Dedication to collaboration and honest dialogue, building teams through genuine inquiry, not hierarchy, not that your way is the only way. These aren't soft skills. These are attributes that separate leaders who build businesses from leaders who build legacies. So in closing, what can a 5th century philosopher like Socrates teach us about leading in the 21st century? Everything. As I'd mentioned before, everything. Socrates teaches us that the quality of our questions determines the quality of our outcomes. That humility is strength, not weakness. That courage matters more than comfortable consensus of your team. that the legacy we leave isn't measured in what we built, but in how we taught others to think. His life and teachings are documented in the works of contemporaries like Plato and Aristotle's. These writings provide valuable insights into the intellectual climate of ancient Athens. It's actually really cool to read and go back to Socrates' readings and how he documented and how his philosophical challenges that he faced by individuals who dared to question conventional wisdom like himself. The thing we don't have today as leaders is that we don't have enough humility to express to others what we don't know, to ask the right questions, to lead through others, and to make them better with humility through ourselves. So here's my challenge to you. Again, hopefully you're able to pin some of this down or think about some of the things I've talked about and the questions you need to ask yourself. For the next week, here's a challenge for you to think about. It's a starting point for you. For the next week, lead like Socrates. Replace statements with questions. Replace certainty with curiosity. Replace telling with teaching. And if you do that, see what happens when you engage your team, not as subordinates to direct, but as thinkers to develop. Ask yourself, am I building a team that depends on me, or am I building leaders who can think for themselves, have humility, have self-awareness? Am I creating a culture of compliance or a culture of inquiries? Am I pursuing truth or protecting my ego along the way? These are uncomfortable questions. Good. Discomfort is where growth happens in your leadership, but more importantly, through the growth of those that are looking to you to lead them and to make them better through your humility and your self-awareness as a leader. So if today's episode challenged you, and I hope it did, I know it's uncomfortable, and I strongly encourage you to pick up The Visionary Leader, where the exploration of Socrates is just one chapter. The entire book is filled with these types of frameworks, principles, and examples from history's greatest visionary leaders that you can apply to your business today. And before we go, I want to hear from you. What's one assumption in your industry or organization that needs to be questioned? Share it with me on social media using the hashtag Visionary Chronicles. I read every single one, and I'll feature some of the best responses in upcoming episodes. And remember what Socrates said, beware the barrenness of a busy life. Don't confuse activity with progress. Don't confuse having answers with effective leadership. And the leaders who change the world change everyone's lives. So next steps are, as I'd mentioned, pick up the Visionary Leader. I certainly hope you do. Connect through the Visionary Chronicles on all major podcast platforms. Engage. Share the insights and things that you hear through this podcast with others. It makes us all better through hashtag the Visionary Chronicles. And challenge yourself and your team. Lead with questions this week and observe the transformation in your team. So if this episode resonated with you, I'd encourage you to really grab a copy of The Visionary Leader. It's available now. And as a thank you to loyal podcast listeners and visionary community we're building together, you can grab an ebook version on Amazon today at $1.99. Still at $1.99. We wanted to just keep it there so it's accessible to everyone. And we've gotten great compliments from those that did purchase it. And I mentioned earlier, as of last month, we actually released the audiobook because we had a lot of our listeners asking for the audiobook version. So that was completed last month, and it's released on all audiobook platforms. And again, the book is really a culmination of decades of research experiences, real-world insights into what really makes leaders like Steve Jobs, Leonardo da Vinci, Socrates truly visionary. And once you read it, if you could provide a review, that would be great. I appreciate it. No pressure. But it really, for me, it allows us to continue to spread the vision even further. So, the Visionary Chronicles, again, thank you for being with me today. Hopefully, you found the Socrates insight helpful, and where the future is created by those bold enough to shape it. And until next time, keep innovating, keep leading, and keep shaping the future. Thank you for your continued support, and I look forward to hopefully hearing from you soon. As I always say, stay true, stay authentic, be different, and be great. But most of all, enjoy the journey along the way.